Okay, part two of Sumas Pub Prawns, How My Dad Met Carl. My dad was particularly sensitive about how any type of law enforcement treated his Black friends, but he had particular disdain for American enforcers, whatever kind they were. And that got passed down to me early on. We both had early and repeated experiences with hostile American law enforcement agents across our life, most frequently without any provocation, other than my dad's accent and me being a pretty girl. But trust, that disdain was well deserved. My dad witnessed anti Black white supremacist fueled hatred firsthand as an adolescent in post war West Germany, but not in the way that you might have just casually assumed based on what I just said. American soldiers occupied the part of Germany my dad grew up in before immigrating to Canada in the 1950s. It was humiliating having to stand in food lines, and the white soldiers would taunt him and tease him and call him a little Nazi boy, and then wouldn't give him the loaf of bread that they'd been dangling in front of his face. One day, my dad spit at one of the white soldiers who did that to him, and that made the soldier angry. So he and a couple of his buddies started to attack my dad. A couple of Black soldiers stepped in and pulled the white soldiers off my dad, saying he was just a little kid. And then one of the Black soldiers gave my dad a piece of candy. Prior to the American occupation, the only time my dad had ever seen a Black person before was at the Hitler School, which is a story I'll get into at another time. But it was where he saw a picture of a Zulu warrior in a book. These Black American soldiers reminded him of that warrior, and they were kind to him. So he was both impressed and humbled and had immediate respect for these soldiers. A few years later, after my dad hit puberty and was already quite grown and playing pro soccer, he and his teammates went into a local guest house for some post-game beers. As they got settled in the pub, they saw a couple of white American soldiers harassing a Black soldier who had been alone at the pub and was just minding his own business, quietly drinking a beer. They started to get loud and put hands on this Black soldier, which got the attention of my dad and his teammates. So he and his teammates got up, jumped the white soldiers, and kicked them out of the guest house. They invited the Black soldier to come sit with them and finish his beer, recognizing him as a soldier who gave him a piece of candy years earlier. It was at that point that he and my dad became friends. That was Carl. My dad spoke English very well and enjoyed hearing Carl's stories about the military, but also about what life was like in the United States since he hadn't been there yet at that point in his life. In return for his kindness, my dad would often take Carl and a couple of his other Black soldier friends to some of his favorite fishing spots near where he grew up, as well as some of his other young adult male adventures. When his tour was over, Carl returned to Oakland, but kept in touch with my dad through letters. A few years later, when my dad decided to move to Canada, they continued to keep in touch and visit back and forth between Oakland and at first Saskatchewan, but eventually BC when my dad settled our family there and where I was born. But they would sometimes meet up in other places in both Canada and the US. I was too young to remember them all, and I know some of those trips actually happened before I was even born. But I do remember Carl and his family as recurring characters in various eras of my life as I think back fondly on my earliest memories.